Hi everybody, my name is Ryan Clark and today I'm going to be talking about how to make consistently profitable indie games. Here is a quick overview of the talk. I'm going to do a brief introduction, then I'll get to the strategy itself with subsection for hooks, market analysis and promotion, and a few miscellaneous tips at the end. So first, who the hell am I? I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes giving you a ton of advice. But why should you listen to this advice? Well, I became a full-time indie developer back in 2004, and since then I've made 10 games, 8 of which were profitable, with 3 grossing in the millions. 4 of those were nominated for IGF awards, and 1 of them won a Game Developer's Choice Award. I have an explicit strategy that I've used to achieve this level of consistency, and that's what I'm going to discuss in this talk. So let's get started. This is a screenshot from a game called Airscape: The Fall of Gravity. One of its developers posted an article on Gamasutra discussing its poor sales. It seems that despite everyone giving them positive feedback and reviews, the game only sold a few hundred copies. The developer concluded that a good game isn't good enough, and I wholeheartedly agree. Unfortunately, Airscape just doesn't have any big hooks, nothing that really grabs you. It's a good game in a sea of good games. I think the method used by many newcomers will generally produce good games like this, but not noteworthy games. It's common to take a look at successful Game X and see various flaws in that game and decide to make Game X but better, or Game X but in space. But what should we be doing instead? Well, by my estimates, 95% of indie games don't make a profit. If you are not confident in being able to explain why the hits hit and why the others did not, you shouldn't be confident about your game's chances either. I know that's a rather frightening statement, but please do think about it. You need a reliable strategy if you want to be consistently in that profitable 5%. And if you don't have such a strategy, you need to be honest with yourself about your chances. You need to become adept at identifying game ideas that satisfy these 3 criteria. They need to sit in the overlap of something that you want to make, something that you will still enjoy making even after working on it for a year or more, and something that you're able to make, which means you need to become skilled at estimating scope, budget, and the abilities of your team, and something that you're confident will make money. So how do we identify ideas that will satisfy all 3 of these criteria? Well, here are the steps that I take for any given game design. I evaluate the quantity and quality of the game's hooks. I evaluate the viability of the market for similar games, and I consider how I can describe and promote the game. So let's start with hooks. To be successful these days, it helps a great deal if your game stands out. If you want people to remember your game, to talk about your game, and to write articles about your game, it needs to have a hook, preferably multiple hooks. In music, a hook is a short riff or melody or phrase that really grabs the listener and gets stuck in their head. In games, a hook is similar, but game hooks often take effect before the game is even played. The hook is some interesting bit of information about the game that compels people to try it or to discuss it. By way of illustration, I'll describe some hooks from Crypt of the NecroDancer, since the design fortunately provided quite a few. First, the game's name is a pun. Some people hate puns and some love them, but at the very least the name is memorable. Rock Paper Shotgun said, "Crypt of the NecroDancer is called Crypt of the NecroDancer," which already makes it incontrovertibly the greatest game of all time. The game's core mechanic is also a hook. The term roguelike rhythm game sounds impossible or crazy, which immediately gets people interested. The game has an excellent hooky soundtrack written by well-known composer Danny Baranowski. Star power itself is a hook. That's why celebrity endorsements in advertising actually work. And our singing shopkeeper is also a fan favorite and gets people talking. But the point is, the people on your team themselves can be hooks. The game's art, while it is pixel art, has personality. People often comment on the hip-thrusting, dancing skeletons. And we even had a hook at conventions like PAX. You can play the game with a dance pad. This is unusual, so the dance pads at our booths always drew large crowds, and the crowds in turn got the attention of any members of the press who might have been walking by. And lastly, in my opinion, we have good, catchy trailers. I'll discuss how to make a good trailer later on. Now, not all hooks are created equal, of course. I think NecroDancer's core mechanic and excellent music are its most powerful hooks. But the more hooks you have and the more compelling each hook is, the greater your chance of snagging a given person's interest. So I think it makes sense to wait for a design that stands out along as many axes as possible. Ideally, you want every facet of your project to be unique and compelling in some way. The gameplay, the art, the audio, the name, the story, the dev team, everything. So you'll need to become adept at evaluating hooks. A great way to do this is to examine the hooks of other successful and unsuccessful indie games. So let's take a look at Darkest Dungeon. And this image here is some awesome NecroDancer promo art that was actually created by Darkest Dungeon's amazingly talented artist, Chris Barassa. Thanks, Chris. And it's in the Darkest Dungeon style. Darkest Dungeon's design, with its exploration of what it would really feel like to be in a terrifying dungeon, is perfect. Everyone immediately agrees. You're right, it would be horrifying to be in a dungeon full of monsters. This is the first true dungeon crawler. That concept alone is a massive hook. The gritty art style is some seriously masterful work, as you can see here, and it is perfectly suited to the game and to Steam's audience. The game has a narrator, and his voice is astoundingly good. His name is Wayne June, and they found him because he was narrating H.P. Lovecraft audiobooks. And if you've seen any of the Darkest Dungeon trailers or played the game, you know what an amazing and creepy voice he has. The game's soundtrack was created by an actual rock star. Stuart Chatwood was a member of the group The Tea Party that was well known in North America in the 90s. And as I mentioned with NecroDancer, star power helps. And as with NecroDancer, I think their trailers themselves are hooky, creative, and compelling. I'm friends with the developers of Darkest Dungeon, so I got to try it prior to its launch. My analysis of its hooks led me to believe that it was going to be a big hit. Its hooks felt significantly more compelling than NecroDancer's, and it didn't have NecroDancer's genre confusion, which I'll discuss a little later. Before the launch, the two founders, Tyler and Chris, were not sure how well it was going to do. But I think everyone feels like this pre-launch. I told them that my gut feel was that it would double NecroDancer's sales results, and you can see on Steam Spy that I was right. Sure, a question like, how strong are these hooks, can only be answered subjectively, but if you practice analyzing the hooks of newly launched games, and then look at their sales results afterwards to see if you were right, you will begin to develop a feel for it. I think that hooks are important in practically all creative endeavors. Look at YouTubers and streamers, for example. I have a friend who is wondering why there are so many YouTubers and streamers who keep making video after video and putting tons of effort into their production quality, despite the fact that they've had consistently low viewer counts for years on end. I replied that it's similar to video games. The videos produced by these people are good quality, and similar to their more successful peers in many ways, but they lack that spark. They just aren't unique enough. These people are probably overestimating the entertainment value of their work while also failing to understand the non-luck factors that generate success for others. They are unable to accurately compare themselves to the big shots to determine what they themselves are lacking. I feel that this situation is unfortunately the same for many indie game developers. Now next, let's talk about market analysis. But don't panic. Analyzing a market is not boring drudge work. You will get to play games for fun, and presumably you'll be doing it in a genre that you enjoy. This is one of my favorite phases of game development. You should find the 10 or 20 games that you think are closest design-wise to your game. And if it's hard to find similar games, you should still take a look at the closest games that you can find. Play all of them, examine their hooks, and look at their sales results. Importantly, you want to include games that have sold poorly. Get a feel for these games and come up with explanations for why each game sold as well or as poorly as it did. Contrast the top sellers to the rest to see what the common factors and what the differences are. Now, market analysis is all about trends. Is the market for a certain type of game trending up, down, or steady? How big is the market? How competitive is that market? And what are the reasons for the underlying trend? I'll come back to this slide in a moment, but knowing how strong a given market is now is helpful, but only if you understand the trend can you predict how strong that market might be when your game finally launches a year or two down the road. In order to identify trends, I keep a close eye on the Steam top sellers charts, as well as the list of new releases. The goal is to get a sense for both the types of new games that are selling well and the types of games that are selling poorly. By paying attention to these charts, you'll begin to identify trends. For example, you might think new game X is similar to game Y that came out 2 years ago, and in fact it seems to be of higher quality, but it's selling significantly worse. Perhaps this genre is falling out of favor. If you then see that all games in that genre are selling more poorly than predecessors, you've likely identified a change in trend. Now, here are just a few specific trends that I identified back in 2016 after a year or two of watching the charts closely. Now, interestingly, this chart is already out of date, and I'll explain why. In 2016, puzzle adventure games were trending down, while walking simulators were trending up. But in 2017, I'd say walking simulators are actually flat or declining. In 2016, arcade twin-stick shooters were scraping the bottom while survival games were soaring. And multiplayer versus games were also trending upward, and they still are in 2017. Now, if you don't stay on top of the trends, you can easily make costly mistakes. For example, if you really enjoy arcade twin-stick shooters, and you remember that back in the day, Geometry Wars seemed to be a really big hit on Xbox Live Arcade, you might think, yeah, twin-stick shooters can make lots of money. But in 2016, you would have been wrong. Assault Android Cactus is a critically acclaimed twin-stick shooter with awesome reviews on Steam. I think it deserves to be a hit, but unfortunately it was not. However, there are roguelike cousins of the twin-stick shooter genre that have succeeded, like The Binding of Isaac, Nuclear Throne, and Enter the Gungeon. Staying on top of the trends will make these sorts of distinctions clear to you and prevent you from making costly mistakes. But in order to have even more confidence in our analysis, we should also try to understand the factors that support these trends. Let's take survival sim games as an example. I believe that the strength of survival sim is here to stay for a number of reasons. First, the majority of human evolution took place in an environment where we were hunting and gathering and struggling to survive. Modern lifestyles share none of those characteristics, but obviously we still retain many base instincts from that era. As a result, survival games allow players to experience some strong feelings that other genres cannot deliver. The survival genre is fairly flexible and can support many aesthetics: 2D, 3D, first person, third person, God view, even ASCII art like Dwarf Fortress. So there's plenty of room for innovation and new types of games. Survival games tend to have high retention, and the trend on Steam is towards games with high retention selling well. They also lend themselves well to online multiplayer, which is another trend on the rise. They are very streamable and YouTubeable, which is another trend on the rise. Most of the original survival games of this era still sell well, and are some of the top-selling games on Steam in recent years. In contrast, it seems that puzzle adventure games are on the decline, largely because that genre is on the opposite side of many of these subtrends. Puzzle adventure games have low replayability and low retention. They are not multiplayer. They are not favored by streamers and YouTubers because getting stumped doesn't make for entertaining viewing. You should also take a look at the size and composition of any market you're interested in. Are there enough fans of this type of game to generate the sales results you need to survive? Has even the highest grossing game produced enough revenue? If not, you may be in trouble. Or perhaps you'll get lucky and be the first to popularize the genre or to discover a new genre, and this is how mega hits like Minecraft occur. But I would not rely on that happening to you. And don't look at vague charts like this one. They are too broad. You want to analyze only the handful of games that are most similar to your design. Many types of games can be considered action games, but just because the action genre is the largest in this chart does not mean that your action game will succeed. Gamers have very specific tastes, and those that enjoy action FPS games may hate action roguelikes. Subgenres are important. Last, take a look at the type of competition you're up against. Sure, the MOBA market is gigantic, but are you really going to steal users from League of Legends and Dota? Those games retain their players for years on end. To defeat League of Legends and Dota, you need to come up with an experience that is so much better that people are willing to abandon their League of Legends and Dota playing friends to get it. Do you think that you can do that? It's possible, but difficult. By contrast, there are a variety of indie genres where individual games are played for 5 to 20 hours, and then players move on. If you can give them a unique new experience in the genre they enjoy, those players may move on to your game next. Now, it's dangerous to enter a market where gamers are monogamous with their game of choice. It's far safer to woo those polyamorous gamers who love numerous games. If a market is large and contains polyamorous gamers, your game may be profitable even with weaker hooks. If there are more fish biting out there, then your hook is more likely to snag one. Conversely, if a market is small or contains monogamous gamers, your game had better have some astoundingly delicious hooks. Next, let's talk a little bit about genre. How do you analyze the market for a mashup game like NecroDancer? Well, you'll want to analyze both markets and then attempt to estimate how much they overlap. The overlap is your actual target market. But beware, with a mashup game, you will really excite fans that love both genres, but you'll also immediately exclude anyone who hates either of the two genres. The effect is that you will have an easier time reaching some minimum level of sales, but you will also limit your max audience size due to some gamers' dislike of one or the other genres. For this reason, I was confident that NecroDancer would be profitable, but I was not confident that it would be a hit. Darkest Dungeon, mentioned above, does not have the genre confusion that NecroDancer has, and as such has a wider target audience. And now a short discussion of how to make relatively accurate revenue estimates. When analyzing the success of other games in your genre, it's helpful to have sales estimates. But unfortunately, many people online seem to look at the numbers of owners listed on Steam Spy, multiply that by the game's retail price, and assume that the developers have pocketed that much money. But in reality, the number is always significantly lower than that. First, you need to take bundles into account. If the game has been out for a while, it will certainly have been offered at a steep discount at some point, and it may even have been offered in a pay-what-you-want bundle or two, or even a Steam free weekend. So do your homework. Sites like steamdb.info can tell you how deeply a game has been discounted, and Google should tell you whether or not it has been in any bundles. Take these factors into account when producing your estimates. A warning flag should be raised if a game's Steam Spy stats for owner is significantly higher than its stats for players. It's normal for there to be a 10 or 0 to 10% discrepancy, but anything larger than that indicates that a pay-what-you-want bundle or some other kind of giveaway has probably taken place. And you need to know about all the things that get deducted from gross revenue. First, the platform holder's fee, which is probably at least 30%. Then there are taxes like VAT. Then you have to pay back whoever invested in the game. And then many companies will split revenue among everyone on the dev team. So you end up with far less than it seems, even for a hit like NecroDancer. Now let's briefly talk a little bit about what I call moonshots. If you're trying to create a mega hit like Minecraft, you're attempting a moonshot. To succeed, you'll generally have to create a whole new genre or take an existing niche genre and bring it mainstream somehow. Basically, you need to have a perfect sense of the current gaming zeitgeist, identify the largest hole in the zeitgeist, and produce a game that flawlessly and fully fills that hole. Easy, right? But the zeitgeist can shift. I think that some games like Flappy Bird are more like fads. They fill a transient hole in the collective consciousness of gamers. If some other big fad game had come out just prior to Flappy Bird, would Flappy Bird have become as big of a hit as it was? I think there's a half-life for fads. If the pet rock fad had come right after the hula hoop fad, it wouldn't have been nearly as popular. People become fad exhausted or fad resistant, so the timing is key. The hole in the zeitgeist that exists now may not be the same hole that will exist in 2 years. I think that some things like Flappy Bird are kind of meta. Flappy Bird became a thing because it was a thing. We were so starved for a fad at that point that when this fad came along, people talked about it because it was strange that other people were talking about it. But by contrast, Minecraft does not feel like a fad. It was a hole in the zeitgeist waiting to be harvested, and it could have been harvested at any time. Fads die out eventually, but Minecraft is still going strong. I think Minecraft's success is based on some core evolutionary tendencies inherent in humans. It's clearly very fun for certain people, especially young people, but why? I believe it's because we've drastically distorted the ways that children function in our society compared to how they would have functioned in hunter-gatherer society. Nowadays, we shield our children from everything dangerous, and we try to get them to learn things that they do not see the relevance of. Whereas in the past, children would have been much more independent, and they would have been put to use by their tribe. A young kid who could forage for berries and help feed the tribe would have been very useful. But these days, children get no chance to help. I think Minecraft is a great outlet for these urges. They get to hunt and gather and craft and work together to survive. Exactly the things that modern society prohibits them from doing. When trying to figure out which game you should make next, I think you should try to feel the zeitgeist. You're unlikely to create a mega hit, but I think it's still a useful practice. Think about which things have hit recently, which fads there have been, and think about why and what it means for the state of internet consciousness. Though remember that you're trying to estimate the future zeitgeist, which will exist when your game is released. And now we'll move on to the final part of the strategy. We've covered hooks and market analysis, so it's time to talk about promoting your game. I've heard numerous indies say, I hate promoting my game, I just want to make games, I don't want to promote them. And I can certainly understand that frustration. But I also think that when game design and promotion go hand in hand, the task becomes much less onerous. You enjoy applying your creativity to game design so that players enjoy your game, right? Well, promoting your game is analogous. Use those creative skills to come up with promotions that people will enjoy, or design a game that promotes itself. Assuming you now have a hooky game idea in mind, you need to plan how to communicate those hooks via your trailers and store page text blurbs. If the games do not translate well to trailers and text descriptions, you will be relying on people playing the game, experiencing the hooks, and then spreading awareness of the game via their own enthusiasm. And if they can't even put your game into words, their attempts to tell others may also fail. Some of the industry's biggest hits, like Minecraft, spread primarily through word of mouth, but basing your promotional strategy on Minecraft level virality is probably unwise. So if you are unsure of the strength of your game's hooks, you should test them. With NecroDancer, we did this by putting out a very early teaser trailer and by demoing at PAX. Despite being a very early version of the game, our teaser trailer gathered quite a few views and was covered fairly widely by the press. And we've recently had similar results with the teaser for our new game, Industries of Titan. The teaser trailer results gave me the confidence to spend some savings to demo NecroDancer at PAX. At PAX, we also had great reaction from fans, but I would caution you against listening to what fans or friends actually say. No matter how good or bad the game is, they will likely say, "I had fun," and then they'll give the controller back to you. Instead, you should pay attention to what they actually do. Are they having fun when they play? You need to become adept at reading body language. Are they crowding around your booth? Are they coming back repeatedly? Are they literally taking out their wallets and throwing them at you? We actually had someone do this to us at PAX, which I took as a pretty good sign. It's common these days for devs to downplay the importance of festivals, awards, and even press. But I disagree. Sure, accolades and reviews themselves may not drive mountains of sales, but people need to hear about your game from numerous sources before they'll actually watch the trailer or buy the game. Also, accolades and review quotes are very helpful for use on your store page and in your trailers. I believe that they encourage viewers to give your game the benefit of the doubt. They'll think, if it has all these awards and great reviews, I guess I'll at least watch the whole trailer. This helps you get started on the right foot and puts viewers in a good frame of mind while your trailer drives home your game's awesome hooks. I was on a panel about early access at the GDC, and the moderator was a journalist. He was asking us how we make our launches noteworthy. But since he was a journalist, I turned the tables and asked him what makes a noteworthy story for him. And he said a human angle. A headline of, "Our game has launched," is not very exciting. Thousands of games launch every year, but if you can come up with something more personal and compelling than that, you stand a much better chance of getting coverage. Also, we are indie. We are not big companies. We can provide a human angle in a way that AAA companies can't. The press are talking directly to us, the creators. If your game isn't going to stand out from most of the competition, demoing at a convention may not be worth your time and money. You lose weeks of time due to prep work, the show itself, and then fatigue after, and then time getting reacquainted with your project when you get back to work. But there's more to a convention than just demoing on the show floor. You can have private meetings with journalists and platform holders, get feedback from your game development peers, etc. Without all the knowledge I've gained from connections I've made at conventions, I would have flamed out of the game industry a long time ago. Now, there's definitely some luck involved when promoting your game. Timing can be important, and there's often little information to go on when deciding when to launch. For example, for NecroDancer's final launch at the end of early access, we had poor timing. We were planning to launch on April 30th, but a few weeks prior to launch, we found out about a Steam-wide roguelike sale that Valve were hoping to include us in. We didn't want to launch after a roguelike sale, as people who want roguelikes may then have already spent their roguelike budget. So we pushed up our launch date as far as we could, which is hard to do when you only have 3 weeks left until launch, and we launched on the 23rd when the sale started. Needless to say, it was not ideal to be launching at the same time that other roguelikes are also on sale for deep discounts. The launch still went quite well by most standards, but not as well as our first early access launch. And despite having a few tricks up our sleeves, like a mini documentary about the game's development, as well as new soundtracks by notable musicians, we didn't get a ton of press coverage for our launch. We chalked it up to early access. It's tough to get people interested in your second launch, and after they thoroughly covered the first one. But then a month or two later, during a slow news week, a fan of NecroDancer posted a Mega Man Total Conversion mod that was called NecroDancer. The NecroDancer mod got far more press coverage than our launch did, which seems kind of insane, but I think it goes to show you the power of timing. The mod launched during a very slow week for gaming news. And I think people should avoid immediately blaming poor marketing when a game fails to find its audience. I've heard people say, my game has great review scores and people really like it, but I just don't know how to market it. But I believe that these days a game needs to market itself. Take a look at the game Undertale. It had a modest Kickstarter success, but little pre-launch marketing that I was aware of, and yet it sold hundreds of thousands of copies on Steam, because it contains numerous mysteries and quirks that people discuss online and work together to solve. Rogue Legacy was similar. It came out of nowhere, but the family tree premise and the addictive gameplay compelled people to talk about the game. Next, I think that after the game itself, your trailers are by far your most important promotional tool. Do not leave trailer planning to the last minute. Trailers are vital and should have ample time and attention paid to them. Do not make your trailer an afterthought at the end of an exhausting push towards launch. When you launch a game on Steam or console, your trailer will be the first thing that people see. If it does a poor job of conveying the awesomeness of your game, your sales will suffer. Here are some of the things I do when planning a trailer. First, start early. When you come up with the design of a game, think about what its potential trailer could be like. If you can't think of an effective way to express the design's hooks in a trailer, it may not be the right design. Next, keep it short. I see so many indie trailers that last for 2 minutes or more. I think you should show the most exciting and hooky parts of your game as fast as possible and then stop, preferably 1 minute or less. Do not let the excitement level drop. People may stop watching. You don't need to show them every feature in the game. You want to show them some awesome things and then stop, leaving them wanting to know more. Next, get to the action. People don't want to see your company logo. They want to learn about the game. If you want to include your logo, you should do it at the end, in my opinion. And also, at the last Steam Dev Days convention, Valve suggested that you test the first 5 seconds of your trailer muted to see how visually appealing it is. Most Steam users have trailers initially muted by default. If they are quickly browsing through their discovery queue, you may only have 5 muted seconds of video to grab their attention. I think that showing review quotes and accolades at the start is smart, as they let viewers know that this is a trailer that they should pay attention to. But even still, you want to keep it to just a second or two. The worst thing your trailer can do is bore the viewer such that they stop watching. Now, think hard about your music. I think this is a weak point of many indie game trailers. In general, you want to leave the player energized, not sleepy, and you want them to go and buy your game right away, not go have a nap. I plan all of my trailers around the music. You ideally want some kind of build-up and climax. You want your viewers to feel something. And music, VO, and audio are a powerful way of achieving this. Don't just take some random track from your game and slap gameplay footage over it. Plan carefully how the music and audio are going to build to tell a story and how they're going to mesh with your visuals. Be creative. As a game developer, you must be a creative person, so use some of that creativity to craft a unique trailer that has hooks of its own. And last, hire a professional to help you. Since trailers are such a vital part of the sales pitch for your game, I think it makes sense to hire someone who really can make your trailer shine. We always work with Marlon, and I cannot recommend him highly enough if you can get him. So let's briefly take a look at a few trailers. I'll start with the trailer we created for Crypt of the NecroDancer's early access launch, so you can see how we tried to incorporate all the concepts we just discussed.
Those monsters driven mad by music. Their twisted souls bound to the beat. And at the bottom, God only knows. You think you're ready? Well, you're not.
I'm not going to wait here like a coward any longer. Dad's lost out there, Eli, and he needs help. You can't stop me. I'm going to the crypt. the NecroDancer!
You want trailers to make you feel something, and you're more likely to remember a trailer when it activates numerous senses, memories, parts of your brain. So audio is very important. People have told us that portions of the music and voiceover from our trailers have given them chills, which is about the best result that we could hope for. This next trailer is from the Kickstarter campaign for Hyper Light Drifter, and this trailer almost single-handedly earned their Kickstarter $650,000. This trailer, it makes you feel things. It shows this world full of dead creatures, ancient devices, monsters and tubes, mysterious symbols and giant bosses, and it teases you with its mysterious and beautiful world. I also like how the music slowly builds in volume and intensity, and then it ends with a melancholy campfire which really sets the Drifter feel. We have one last trailer here. This trailer is from the original Gears of War game, and in my opinion, it's the best video game trailer ever made. I still remember it nearly 10 years after it launched, and I got this video from YouTube where a fan had posted it. The fan's bootleg copy of the trailer has 12 million views, so other people obviously remember it too. The creative juxtaposition of the sad, slow song during a frightening and violent video is amazing, and it achieves all of this in 60 seconds.
Dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world.
There are so many other amazing trailers out there too. If you search the web for best trailers of all time, you're sure to learn a lot. For example, Destiny's old expansion, The Taken King, had a website that created custom trailers tailored for each individual player, based on what they'd achieved while playing the base game. That is some seriously awesome creativity right there. So to conclude this first part of the talk about my strategy for creating consistently profitable indie games, I'd like to refute the often repeated claim that ideas are a dime a dozen. Sure, most ideas are a dime a dozen, but good ideas are extremely valuable. If you can come up with an idea that has great hooks, a viable target market, is something that will promote itself, is something that you're excited to make, and is something that you have the skills and resources to make, then you have something extremely valuable on your hands. You have the seed for a game that is very likely to be profitable and may possibly be a hit. Don't let anyone tell you that it's worthless. Instead, guard it jealously. The hardest part of being a successful developer, in my opinion, is not making the game. Being a talented game developer is a prerequisite for success, sure, but it's far from sufficient. The hardest part is coming up with a design that actually satisfies all of these conditions. 99% of ideas will fall short. In the indie space, the technological barriers have melted away. We're no longer competing technologically, we're competing creatively, which is awesome. Now, you need to be honest with yourself when evaluating your hooks and compare your design to the designs of other games. Is your core concept as compelling as the concepts of Papers, Please or Darkest Dungeon? Are your art and music and feel as amazing as that of Hyper Light Drifter? Games like these serve as great measuring sticks and will help you to put your own designs into perspective. You don't need to equal or surpass these games, of course, but if your design is nowhere close, it's probably wise to return to the drawing board. So yes, I actually try to analyze the revenue potential of a game idea before I create that game. To some, this may seem crass, or it might appear that it could result in soulless games, and I understand that concern. But just because I use this method does not mean that I'll be creating games that I'm loath to make. I just need to come up with so many designs that I stumble across one that ignites my passion while still having solid revenue potential. I'm aware that there are many folks out there who make exactly what they want with no concern for revenue, and I respect that. But with a wife and 2 kids, I'm somewhat more risk averse. So I come up with many ideas, and I evaluate them until I find just the right one. I would advise that you don't start working on a game until you're reasonably confident that it is a design that meets the criteria listed. Making a game will cost you a lot of energy, time, and money. If you choose the wrong idea, much of that will be wasted. Waiting another month while you seek new inspiration and new ideas is far less costly, in my opinion. Okay, so we've covered the main strategy of designing a game that has hooks, that has a viable target market, and that can be easily promoted. But there are a number of other factors that can impact your decision making, so we'll discuss a few of those considerations now. I think early access on Steam is a great thing, and that a lot of the fear that surrounds it is unjustified. You may have seen this chart online or others like it, but I don't think it necessarily reflects reality. First, you need to treat your early access launch as though it's practically your final launch. You don't want a delayed post-launch spike like the one you see on this chart. You need to use all of your promotional creativity to ensure that your launch is a noteworthy event. If you don't, you will run the risk of getting stuck in a self-perpetuating loop. You'll have slow sales at the start, which can lead to continued slow sales as players and press who look at the game may think, oh, this is a game that doesn't have many reviews. I guess it's not popular. I'll go play something else. Second, this chart shows sales declining over time. I think that if you have the right plan for early access, you can actually grow your sales over time. Take a look at Nuclear Throne's graph on SteamCharts.com sometime, or even Subnautica. You'll see that thanks to their frequent updates, Vlambeer managed to grow their player base over time. We were actually starting to see this with NecroDancer too, with the last few updates before our final launch. If you have a game that can keep people interested long term, and you have a development method that keeps them coming back to see what's new, you can certainly use early access to great advantage. And last, this chart also shows that the final launch is a non-event, hardly even a blip in sales. This certainly can be the case, but it can be the case for a non-early access launch too. You just need to ensure that there's something noteworthy about your final launch that gets people talking. It's going to be more difficult than your initial launch, sure, since people have already been playing and talking about the game. But with NecroDancer, we will be able to turn our final launch into a spike at least as large as those we see from the Steam sales. So what are the benefits of early access? Well, I think there are many. I like the fact that you get to find out what your community wants the game to be. I don't think you should listen to every feature request that is sent your way, but I do think that you should be mindful of what the community at large is doing with the game. I didn't realize that speedrunning was going to become such a focus for NecroDancer, and thanks to early access, I was able to see that and adapt the game somewhat to make speedrunning even more fun for the community. Early access also lets you avoid being fully judged by critics and Metacritic until your game is 100% perfect. You're going to produce a better game thanks to all the feedback and bug spotting from the community, and this will pay off. But there are drawbacks to early access too. Only certain genres will work. The benefit of early access only accrues if you have a community, so a game that players play once and then abandon isn't going to work. Early access also makes it difficult to make major changes to the core gameplay. For an example of this, you should take a look online at the troubles the Darkest Dungeon team had when they introduced their corpse mechanic. And last, it may seem counterintuitive, but you need to ensure that your game is very polished and playable even before you early access it. People don't want to play a broken game regardless of whether or not it's in early access. You'll generate a lot of negative reviews, and that may be hard to recover from. Instead, you should launch a slice of your game that is polished and playable, and leave the final content or additional features for development during early access. Many people are hesitant to buy early access games, so having a high review score on Steam will go a long way towards allaying those fears. NecroDancer had a 99% positive rating during early access, and I think that was a key factor in our success. Now, I know it has been discussed at length online, but I'd quickly like to refute the core indie-pocalypse arguments to make sure that no one is scared away from making an indie game for the wrong reasons. There are many reasons to be scared of making an indie game. Just make sure that you're scared by the right ones. At the core of the fear is Steam Direct and previously Steam Greenlight. People think that allowing more games onto Steam will dilute Steam and reduce revenue per game. Well, this isn't true for most of us. The games that are now being accepted via Steam Direct were always there. We were always competing with those games and those developers. The only difference now is that we're competing with them on Steam for promotional space, whereas before we were competing with them just to get onto Steam at all. So yes, there are a lot of games that we are competing with, but it's always been this way. And in fact, I would say that having all of these additional games on Steam is a benefit to those, like me, who analyze markets and compare and contrast successful versus unsuccessful games. We have a lot more data to go on now. When I first started out, there was very little data to be had regarding which games were selling well and which were not. In fact, one of the games I designed that was not profitable was a game where I misjudged the viability of a target market due to lack of data. But thanks to the flood, we now have a great many games in every genre to analyze. You can look at the successful games and contrast them with the unsuccessful ones to determine common factors that can contribute to success or failure. And since there are so many games and so much sales data to go on, we are no longer judging a genre's viability by the results of just one or two games. Now, there are graphs like this one online that show the revenue per game is dropping on Steam, but that is to be expected when you suddenly add thousands of older games, back catalog games, and games created by indie first-timers. If you go back and look at the games that were being added every day when the floodgates first opened, it's obvious that they weren't going to launch on Steam and suddenly make millions. So sure, revenue per game is dropping a bit, but that's just because a bunch of poorly selling games were added. The best-selling games on Steam sell just as well now as they ever did. People also fear that Steam will turn into a wasteland similar to mobile app stores because it's now more open. But for that to be the case, you'd have to show that openness is the reason that the App Store is the way that it is. I believe that it's hard to succeed on the App Store because of the audience. People who play mobile games don't scour news sites to find out about the latest app, nor do they fly to far-flung conventions like PAX just to play the latest games. Instead, they find out about games via the App Store itself, largely. This is, of course, going to result in games succeeding only if they get good placement on the store. But Steam gamers are more gregarious. They go to shows, they read news, they browse Steam and wishlist things, and they play games and talk about games with their friends. They're much more aware of the breadth of games out there, which is why Steam makes it possible for so many games to succeed. There have been a few high-profile indie launches that underperformed expectations of the developer and the press, and people wonder if this is a sign that revenues are starting to crumble. But I don't think that a few failures are statistically significant enough to worry about, and I also think that these types of events were inevitable. The indie boom of 2008 to 2012 generated a lot of high-profile hits. The people who made those hits are starting to launch their follow-up games, and it's only natural that some of those follow-ups will post disappointing results. People also worry that indie games are going to see ever-increasing budgets like AAA games, and they call this III indie. I think this is the silliest fear of all, partly because the term III is an abomination, but it's fairly clear that ideas are what make an indie game successful, not budget. If you have the next clever idea like Papers, Please or Super Hot, you can make millions of dollars on a fairly tiny budget. Creativity is the key, not funding. So to sum up, sure, there are reasons to be concerned for the viability of the market for games, but for old-timers like me, it seems a little crazy. Back in 2004, when I started, there was no Steam, Well, it was barely there, but it wasn't available for indies, nor Steam Spy, and we had to convince people to buy games directly from our websites. There was no YouTube, and bandwidth was expensive, so we had no trailers. We still managed to make a living even back then. The current situation, with all the benefits of Steam and consoles, and the much wider awareness of indie games in general, seems like utopia in comparison. Now, I have a final few tips that didn't fit into any other section, so I'll talk about them here. First, I think it's important to come up with great hooks that get people interested in your game, but you need to be just as aware of the factors that may turn people off. Take art style, for example. Remember that game Airscape: The Fall of Gravity that I mentioned earlier? Its gameplay was inspired by Super Meat Boy, but for some reason they chose to go with a much cuter art style. I think that this mismatch hurt them, as people looking for a hardcore difficult game will not expect it to look cute, so they may not have given the game a chance. Naming is another example. The precursor to the game Rocket League was a game similar in design, but it was named Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket-Powered Battle Cars. Impossible to remember, and it doesn't even have a good acronym. In contrast, the game Don't Starve has an awesome name. It's short, easy to remember, and tells you a bit about the gameplay to get you interested right off the bat. Last, you should be thinking long-term. I've been making indie games professionally since 2004, but I've been making games as a hobby since I was 6. It takes a long time to hone your game-making skills, and it also takes a long time to build up your reputation and awareness within the industry. I talked about the importance of your team and about ensuring that your game stands out on many axes, and unless you can make hooky graphics, music, audio, and gameplay all by yourself, you will need to attract talented teammates to work with you. The more games you make and the more you put yourself out there at conventions and festivals, the more your reputation will snowball, and the more likely it will be that people will want to work with you. But it takes time. But don't just network for the sake of networking. I've made tons of friends in the industry just because I like making friends and helping people. It turns out that some of those friends ended up becoming collaborators years later, and many have given me gameplay feedback that have made my games far better. But those are just bonuses, not the goal. We're fortunate to work in an industry that is so supportive, so get out there and be a positive part of it. So, in conclusion, we've now discussed my strategy for using hooks, market analysis, and promotion for creating a successful indie game. It's tough out there these days, but it's still very possible to succeed as an independent game developer. I see 1 or 2 games launch on Steam each week that make millions, and yet are made by small teams. I hope that you'll come away with this talk with a few more tools in your tool bag to help you find that kind of success. I know that this isn't the only way to make successful indie games. There are many people out there doing well using entirely different methods. But I do think that this method is helpful because it has explicit steps you can follow, and if you practice it and if you come up with the right ideas, you can be much more confident that your games will succeed. Okay, that's the end of my talk, but if you'd like to know more, I occasionally post similar content on my Gamasutra blog and on YouTube, so drop me a follow on Twitter and I'll keep you posted. Thanks.